Hi guys, I'm back. I've also just, whilst been uploading that, I hadn't realised how big my hair was today, so I'm quite enjoying the volume I've got going on. Right, so I said I wasn't going to witter, so I should probably cut that, but I can't bother now. Right, so we are on page 51 in this. I'm hoping you literally just clicked next. Although you might have had your lunch in between, hopefully put a little like pen mark where you got up to on that paragraph. So the paragraph starts with "my reason wavered." In fact, I'll just read this bit. "My reason wavered, but it did not fail me utterly. I have more than once observed that in my second character, my faculties seemed sharpened to a point, and my spirits more tensely elastic. Thus it came about where Jekyll perhaps might have succumbed, Hyde rose to the importance of the moment. My drugs were in one of the presses of my cabinet. How was I to reach them? That was the problem that, crushing my temples in my hands, I set myself to solve. The laboratory door I had closed off. If I sought to enter by the house, my own servants would consign me to the gallows. I saw I must employ another hand, and thought of Lanyon." Highlight. "How was he to be reached? How persuaded? Supposing that I escaped capture in the streets, how was I to make my way into his presence, and how should I, an unknown and displeasing visitor, prevail on the famous physician to rifle the study of his colleague Dr. Jekyll? Then I remembered that of my original character, one part remained to me. I could write my own hand." So his handwriting still looks the same as Jekyll's. When he made up his bank account to be Hyde, he slanted it the opposite direction. But basically, when he's Hyde, it's the one thing that he can still do that is Jekyll, which is his handwriting. So I've highlighted I could write my own hand is like the plot point. "And once I'd conceived that kindling spark, the way that I must follow came lighted up from end to end." So he's got a plan. Thereupon I arranged my clothes as best I could, and summoning a passing hansom, that's a cab, drove to a hotel in Portland Street, the name of which I chanced to remember. At my appearance, which was indeed comical enough, however tragic a fate these garments covered, the driver could not conceal his mirth. I gnashed my teeth upon him with a gust of devilish fury, which I've highlighted. And I've circled gnashed my teeth and devilish fury. And the smile withered from his face. Happily for him, yet more happily for myself, for in another instant I had certainly dragged him from his perch. So basically, he turns up at the hotel that he's asked to go to just in time before he's about to hurt the cab driver because he's really mad. At the inn, as I entered, I looked about me with so black a countenance as made the attendants tremble. Not a look did they exchange in my presence, but as obsequiously took my orders, led me to a private room, brought me wherewithal to write. Hyde, in danger of his life, was a creature new to me. Please highlight that and put it on the Hyde page. So he is the most efficient version of Hyde that he's ever been. This is about himself and saving himself and nothing more right now. So I've also highlighted the next bit. I've actually highlighted it in a different colour, the pink bit here, where it says, "Shaken with inordinate anger, strung to the pitch of murder, lusting to inflict pain." Yet the creature was astute, mastered his fury with a great effort of the will, composed his two important letters, one to Lanyon and one to Paul, and, that he might receive an actual evidence of their being posted, sent them out with directions that they should be registered. So he's really thoughtful in his passionate moment of being Hyde. He's thought everything through really carefully. Henceforth he sat all day over the fire in the private room, gnawing his nails. There he dined, sitting alone with his fears, the waiter visibly quailing before his eye. And thence, when the night was fully come, he set forth into the corner of a closed cab, and was driven to and fro about the streets of the city. He, I say, I cannot say I, which I've highlighted, because even though he's acknowledged that they're the same person, he still feels very much like Hyde is in control of all of this. And the next line's really important, and it's another one that you need to put on the Hyde page, okay? It says, "That child of hell had nothing human, nothing lived in him but fear and hatred." Now, I'm trying to remember if the last essay that you did, I was trying to remember if it was my year 11s, was about how Hyde was inhuman. That would have been a great quote. If you actually want to add that to your essay, just pop it up. It doesn't even need to do anything with it. You could just put that quote at the bottom, or on your Hyde page, put it down and put just a little star next to it. Just because I think it's a useful quote. I mean, what are they really going to ask us about? The questions are, there's only so many themes in the novel, so they're going to be asking about the themes of the novel, which is good versus evil, the bad in all of us, very similar themes to Lord of the Flies, which is kind of why I picked the book, because it's quite easy to transfer the ideas. Okay, so he had nothing human in him at this point. He lives nothing in him except fear and hatred. And when at last, thinking the driver had begun to grow suspicious, he discharged the cab and ventured on foot, attired in his misfitting clothes, an object marked out for observation, into the midst of the nocturnal passengers. These two base passions raged within him like a tempest, meaning fear and hatred. He walked fast, hunted by his fears, chattering to himself, skulking through the lens, through the less frequented thoroughfares, counting the minutes that still divided him from midnight. Once a woman spoke to him, offering, I think, a box of lights. He smote her in the face and she fled. So he's just like this bubbling, crazy guy, and he needed to leave the hotel. He called a cab, he drove around for as long as he could until the taxi driver was like, "Where are we going, mate? What are you doing?" And he's like, "It's not midnight yet." So then he's walking the back streets, trying not to be seen and recognised, and he's just given this woman a piece of his mind. So this next paragraph starts with, when I came to myself at Lanyon's. I've put chapter 9 here because that is basically where we know that the narrative switches from Utterson to Lanyon, and this is now Hyde's/Jekyll's version of events that we've already read in Dr. Lanyon's narrative in chapter 9. More pieces coming together. When I came to myself at Lanyon's, meaning when I have taken the potion in front of Lanyon, so it's like we've skipped to the bit here because he doesn't. Stevenson, the writer, is like, well, I don't need to tell them again. They already know what happens. That's my explanation for that. I guess whilst it is like Jekyll writing his thing, it's Stevenson writing it, and he doesn't need to bore us with the details again. Okay, so when I came to myself at Lanyon's, the horror of my old friend perhaps affected me somewhat. I do not know. It was at least but a drop in the sea to the abhorrence with which I looked back upon these hours. A change had come over me. It was no longer the fear of the gallows, it was the horror of being Hyde that racked me. Hyde like that. So now he's terrified of actually being Hyde, because he doesn't know what he's going to do and he can't control it. I received Lanyon's condemnation partly in a dream. It was partly in a dream that I came home to my own house and got into bed. I slept after the prostration of the day, with a stringent and profound slumber which not even the nightmares that wrung me could avail to break. I woke in the morning shaken, weakened but refreshed. I still hated and feared the thought of the brute that slept within me. Highlight, please. So he's described himself as a creature on numerous occasions, and he's now used the word brute. So I would actually put creature and brute on your Hyde page. And I'd put in brackets Jekyll describing himself as Hyde. And I had not, of course, forgotten the appalling dangers of the day before, but I was once more at home, in my own house, and close to my drugs, and gratitude for my escape shone so strong in my soul that it almost rivalled the brightness of hope. I was stepping leisurely across the court after breakfast, drinking the chill of the air with pleasure, when I was seized again with those indescribable sensations that heralded the change. And I had but the time to gain the shelter of my cabinet before I was once again raging and freezing with the passions of Hyde. So he's walking between his posh bit that's Jekyll, and he suddenly gets these convulsions and he has to race over to his laboratory, and he turns back into Hyde just as he gets there before any of his servants see him. So it's happened again. Excuse me. It took on this occasion a double dose to recall me to myself, and alas, 6 hours after, as I sat looking sadly in the fire, the pangs returned and the drug had to be re-administered. In short, from that day forth it seemed only by a great effort as of gymnastics, and only under the immediate stimulation of the drug, that I was able to wear the countenance of Jekyll. You need to highlight that sentence from in short to countenance of Jekyll. So before, he described wearing the cloak of Hyde. And at the time, I said, put a little star. It's really important because that metaphor comes back. Now, we've got the literal thing with the clothes being too big for him, but he also was using the metaphorical idea of Jekyll was his real person, Hyde was the cloak that he could go out and do bad things, and then he could take the cloak off and he was back to where he was. Now, the metaphor has changed. He's basically saying that from that moment onwards, he wears the countenance of Jekyll. Hyde is now the default setting, which is what I've written at the top. Hyde has become the default setting. So Hyde is now who he is, and Jekyll is the person that he has to use the drug to turn himself back into, and he has to double the dose. And we've talked about drugs and the need to keep increasing the dosage of that. Okay, so I've actually circled the verb to wear the countenance of Jekyll, and I've actually put its metaphor linked to the cloak of Hyde because it's quite useful for you to, for revision when we come back to this next year, to have that there. At all hours of the day and night I would be taken with a premonitory shudder. Above all, if I slept or even dozed for a moment in my chair, it was always as Hyde that I awakened. Uh-oh. Under the strain of this continually impending doom, please underline or highlight, and by the sleeplessness to which I now condemn myself, I, even beyond what I had thought possible to man, I became, in my own person, a creature eaten up and emptied by fever, languidly weak both in body and mind, and solely occupied by one thought, the horror of my other self. So I've circled the creature eaten up and emptied by fever, and I've also described the horror of my other self. I've highlighted that too. But when I slept, or when the virtue of the medicine wore off, I would leap almost without transition, for the pangs of transformation grew daily less marked, into the possession of a fancy, brimming with images of terror, a soul boiling with causeless hatreds, and a body that seemed not strong enough to contain the raging energies of life. So when he turns back into Hyde again, he can't control it. It's so violent and it's really quick now. It doesn't even hurt as much turning back into Hyde, because that's basically who he is now. So this next line is super important, and I've actually put little stars either side. So it says, the powers of Hyde seem to have grown with the sickliness of Jekyll. In fact, you need to put that on either Hyde or Jekyll's page, don't care which. And certainly the hate that now divided them was equal on each side. So Jekyll hates Hyde, Hyde hates Jekyll. They're trapped in this room, Hyde can't go out. It's a bit of a nightmare. We all know that feeling, don't we? Being trapped inside, I mean, not having an alter ego. Although maybe you do, I don't know. At this stage of lockdown, who knows? We might all have alter egos by the time we come out of this. Okay. With Jekyll, it was a thing of vital instinct. He had now seen the full deformity of that creature that shared with him some of the phenomena of consciousness and was co-heir with him to death. So they are tied together, and Jekyll's like, if I die, he dies. Where does that leave me? I mean, dead, but also you get rid of Hyde. And beyond these links of community, which in themselves made the most poignant part of his distress, he thought of Hyde, for all his energy of life, as of something not only hellish, but inorganic. Good word also to describe him not being human. This was the shocking thing, that the slime of the pit seemed to utter cries and voices, that the amorphous dust gesticulated and sinned. That what was dead and had no shape should usurp the offices of life. And this again, that the insurgent horror was knit to him closer than a wife, which I've also used, I've highlighted that as a metaphor. Because they're closer to each other than, he used father and son relationship earlier on in the novel, and now he's using knit closer than a wife. And he can't believe that the badness in him has become a person, and that's who he is now. He's really, all of that bit there where he's talking about the slime of the pit, he's struggling to understand how the badness has got the control. So the horror was knit to him closer than a wife, closer than an eye, lay caged in his flesh, where he heard it mutter and felt it struggle to be born, and at every hour of weakness and in the confidence of slumber prevailed against him and deposed him out of life. The hatred of Hyde for Jekyll was of a different order. His terror of the gallows drove him continually to commit temporary suicide and return to his subordinate station of a part instead of a person. But he loathed the necessity. He loathed the despondency into which Jekyll had now fallen, and he resented the dislike with which he was himself regarded. So this is talking about Hyde, and I've highlighted the hatred for Hyde was of a different order. Because he's scared of being hanged, he gives in sometimes and allows Jekyll to come out, which is when he says drove him to commit temporary suicide. So he's talking about becoming Hyde, so becoming Jekyll and going inside of the body of Jekyll. Return to his subordinate station, so he doesn't like being the second person in the body, and instead of being the whole person, being a part of it. Doesn't want that anymore. So I've highlighted that line. I've also underlined, he loathed the despondency into which Jekyll had now fallen, and he resented the dislike with which he was himself regarded. So there's a real push and pull between Jekyll and Hyde. Hyde despises the fact that Jekyll despises him, if that makes sense. Hence the ape-like tricks that he would play me, scrawling in my own hand blasphemies on the pages of my books, burning the letters and destroying the portrait of my father, and indeed, had it not been for his fear of death, he would long ago have ruined himself in order to involve me in his ruin. So I've highlighted, this is actually the last page, how exciting is that? The ape-like tricks. Again, dead easy quote to just throw in there, particularly if you're trying to talk about Darwinism, you've got the corded hairy hand, and the ape-like tricks. So when they're trapped in the laboratory, and whenever Hyde's out, he plays tricks on Jekyll, and he scribbles all over. It scribbles blasphemy, so he's swearing and using, words against God in all over Jekyll's books, burning his portrait of his father, just trying to destroy anything that means something to Jekyll. It's really underhanded, intentionally mean stuff that Hyde is doing. And he basically says that if Hyde had been able to murder Jekyll without killing himself, he would have. That's what that last line means, where he says, if it had not been for his fear of death, he would have long ago ruined himself in order to involve me in the ruin. But obviously he can't. Now, this is where I struggle with Jekyll a little, is this last bit, okay? But his love of life is wonderful. Please highlight that. I go further. I, who sicken and freeze at the mere thought of him, when I recall the abjection and passion of this attachment, and when I know how he fears my power to cut him off by suicide, I find it in my heart to pity him. So I've highlighted that bit about I know how he fears my power to cut him off by suicide. I find it in my heart to pity him. Do you? Do you, Jekyll? Because I don't think you should. And I'm really struggling with this as a moral concept. You should have taken one for the team here and killed yourself to kill Hyde. But, his love for life is wonderful. Oh, he's got such a vibrancy about him. Really? Okay. So, you do need all of this, and you can form your own opinion. I'm really bad at telling you what I think about things. You do not have to agree with me. You can absolutely agree that he's torn. I'm not sure what Stevenson wanted me to think, because he was worrying about his audience. He's not necessarily worrying about a 21st century audience. But I'm struggling to feel sorry for him when he could have dealt with this situation, and he didn't, because he's basically got no life left anyway. I think okay, I'm going to carry on reading and leave my opinion out of it. Okay, we're going to finish it now, because it says I've got 24 minutes, and I'm on 16, so I'm good. It is useless, and the time awfully fails me to prolong this description. No one has ever suffered such torment. Oh, boo-hoo. Please highlight that. Let that suffice. And yet even to these, habit brought, no, not alleviation, but a certain callousness of soul, a certain acquiescence of despair, and my punishment might have gone on for years, but for the last calamity which has now fallen, and which has finally severed me from my own faith and nature. So I've highlighted the callousness of soul and the acquiescence of despair. Hang on a second. Joey, can you just be quiet, please? I can't concentrate. First time I've had to do that. Okay, so to be callous is to be cold. To acquiesce is to give in to something. So giving in to despair. And basically, he would have allowed this to... He thinks that Jekyll... And I wonder whether this is him saying... Stevenson saying that he is weak. He would have allowed it to just go on and on. However, he's running out of his potion is the next bit. Basically, he's running out of the salt that he got the first batch from. So, let me carry on. My provision of the salt, which had never been renewed since the date of my first experiment, began to run low. I sent out for a fresh supply and mixed the draught. The ebullition followed, and the first change of colour, not the second, I drank it, and it was without efficiency. You will learn from Poole how I have had London ransacked. It was in vain. And I am now persuaded that my first supply was impure, and that it was that unknown impurity which lent efficiency to the draught. So basically, the chemical, the salt that he got first time round, he's running out of it, and he sends Poole across every chemist in London, and he gets the right salt, but it doesn't work. So he thinks the first batch, there must have been something wrong with it that he can't identify that meant that the draft worked. So now he cannot recreate the draft. So basically he's been forced, his hand has been forced into this situation where Hyde is in control and he's running out of potion. And I'm on the last paragraph. About a week had passed, and I am now finishing this statement under the influence of the last of my old powders. Highlight. This then is the last time, short of a miracle, that Henry Jekyll can think his own thoughts or see his own face, now how sadly altered in the glass. Nor must I delay too long to bring my writing to an end, for if my narrative has hitherto escaped destruction, it has been by a combination of great prudence and great good luck. So he's saying that if you find this and it hasn't been ripped up by Hyde, then that's great. Combination of luck and the fact that he finishes it early enough. Should the throes of change take me in the act of writing it, Hyde will tear it in pieces. But if some time shall have lapsed after I have laid it by, his wonderful selfishness and circumscription to the moment will probably save it once again from the action of his ape-like spite. Circle, put it on your Hyde page. Basically, he's too self-centred to think to go looking for something like this. And indeed, the doom that is closing on us both has already changed and crushed him. Please highlight. Half an hour from now, when I shall again and forever re-endue that hated personality, I know how I shall sit shuddering and weeping in my chair, or continue with the most strained and fear-struck ecstasy of listening, to pace up and down this room, my last earthly refuge, and give ear to every sound of menace. Will Hyde die upon the scaffold, or will he find the courage to release himself at the last moment? God knows. I am careless. This is my true hour of death, and what is to follow concerns another than myself. Here, then, as I lay down the pen and proceed to seal up my confession, I bring the life of that unhappy Henry Jekyll to an end. Okay, so that whole last bit I've highlighted there, where it goes from, will Hyde die upon a scaffold, or will he find the courage to release himself at the last moment? God knows I am careless. And I've circled, God knows I am careless. Are you? Or could you kill yourself and kill Hyde? Are you just going to release Hyde out into the wilderness? It seems like you're okay with that. I have a problem with that. I feel very much like this confession, as he describes it at one point earlier on, he describes it as a confession. His statement of the case, I feel it's quite self-indulgent. It makes me really dislike Jekyll. Because this is all about his selfishness and his narcissism, and the narcissism in people, I suppose. It's all about his id and his, it's so terrible having to be a rich person and be good all the time. Oh, boo-hoo, let me play the smallest little violin for you over here, because there's lots of poor people who die prematurely and have, do you know what I mean? Like, he's living through a time where there are way worse things, and I'm really struggling to have sympathy for Jekyll. And this final bit just is the last nail in the coffin for me. When he says, God knows I'm careless, this is my true hour of death. It's supposed to sound tragic and bold. I'm struggling. I then have to try and think about how would a Victorian reader see it. I think that a Victorian reader might actually agree with me. I think they might see it as self-indulgent, and he shouldn't have messed around with something that was not his place to mess with. He's not God. God made us the way we are, if you believe in God. Or evolution made us the way we are, if you believe in that. But the idea that a man should separate our two parts, separate our id from our superego, although remember those terms had not quite been coined yet by Freud, but as I've told you before, it was the same people that he was writing about. So people were talking about the inner animal and things like that, and Darwinism. I just have will he find the courage to release himself at the last moment? I almost feel like his sympathy lies still with Hyde. And I don't like that. And I actually think a Victorian reader would probably think the same thing, that it was all very exciting, but once you let Pandora out of its box, can't put it back in again. So what is the moral lesson that we learn from this? That being two things all at once and having a superego that keeps our id in check, where we don't just do whatever the hell we want all the time, maybe that's what's needed in society. Because if you are trying to be a civilized society and you allow someone to just do bad things, like a purge, you've all seen that film, or maybe heard of the film. If you haven't seen it, you're probably not old enough. You make it bigger, you give it exercise, it licks at the chops of memory. So once you've done something bad, you want to do more bad things. So basically, I personally feel like Stephen's kind of given us a bit of a moral lesson here, that whilst you might think that you want to do all these bad things, if you let it out, there's no putting it back in. And actually, that's the point of our superego, is to make sure that we can exist in a civilized society. However, you guys can have your own thoughts on this. You might have a slight different take on mine. Please do email me or message me on the VLE with your thoughts on the ending of the novel. I'm hoping to see you at some point, but we probably won't be talking about Jekyll and Hyde. We'll probably have to do language, just because I don't quite know how it's all going to work at the minute. So when we come back in September, hopefully we'll be picking up with Jekyll and Hyde at that point, and we'll just have to have a really big discussion about the plot, the clever narrative structure where you get that final statement of the truth at the end, and what you think about Jekyll, and indeed about what you think Stevenson's message is. So listen guys, I'm nearly out on my time again, so I'm going to stop. Probably won't be the last of the videos, because I think the next task I set you, I'll probably use a video as well. Okay, so I hope you're all good, and I hope to see you all really soon. Bye bye.